Hey everyone, I'm Mike Settele, the founder of Settele Tutoring, and in this lesson I hope to give you a window into my instincts for SAT math questions. Specifically, how do I know when to use one of the SAT math strategies, guess and check, arithmetize, and plug points into equations? If you're not familiar with these strategies, then you should go to my website, setteletutoring.com/math, to watch the longer lesson that introduces and explains these three main SAT strategies. It includes practice problems so that you can actually start using them for yourself. But one of the biggest complaints that I get from my students is that even though they understand the strategies when I explain them, when they're taking a test on their own, they don't think to arithmetize or guess and check. Or they don't know which questions are good for those strategies, so they end up defaulting to their normal algebraic way of solving. But obviously, if you keep taking SATs the old way, then you'll keep getting your old score. So what I'm going to do in this lesson is just go through 10 random math questions and think out loud about what I see and what my first few steps would be to solve these questions if I came across them on a test. Now, I've written all these questions myself so that we don't spoil any practice tests, but I wrote them a long time ago and I definitely don't remember the solutions. I also don't know which 10 questions we're about to get. I randomly sorted hundreds of questions and dropped 10 of them into my whiteboard, so you will see my genuine, unplanned reaction. I won't solve every question completely, but I will put links to the full video solutions in the video description so that you can see the full process if you want. And that's a great reminder to please subscribe to my channel so that you know whenever I make new lessons, and to put it bluntly, the more subscribers I have, the more time I have to make new videos for you. You should also visit setteletutoring.com/library for all of my free SAT resources, including quizzes and a trainer tool that can also help you figure out when to use the SAT math strategies. And if you want even more practice, you should buy a copy of my SAT Math Packets study guide, which will help you target your specific weaknesses on the test. All of my lessons and explanations in the books always emphasize the strategies so that you can develop efficient test-taking habits like mine. Now, let's get to some math questions. All right, let's see what we get. Question 1. All right, we got some graphs here, so I'm definitely going to be thinking about this one in terms of guess and check, right? I don't care what this story says. I would be going into this story looking for specific things. Right away I see, do I have a positive slope, an increase, or some sort of decrease here? So I go into the lines looking for that exact thing. And okay, here we go. They're increasing the size of the wetlands, right? So this kind of thinking lets me get down to two choices right away. And then I could say, okay, well, what else is the difference? I have a line or I have an exponential growth. And it does seem to say 384, so that's probably a line. So this one would be pretty easy. But I want to stress that even though it seems like we're just kind of interpreting the story, I'm doing it backwards. I'm doing it from a guess and check perspective. I'm looking at this and I'm saying, I don't care what the story says. I care how the story matches the options that I'm given. Remember, multiple choice lets you think backwards about questions. Let's see what else we get here. Okay, this one also seems like a good guess and check, just based on the fact that the answer choices look very complicated, but I'm noticing certain differences between them, right? I could see, does the 6 or the 13 have to be the smallest one, right? Look at the difference here. A and B have 6 is less than L is less than 13, or less than or equal to, and then the direction is flipped for the other one. So in the other difference obviously is, are the L inequality symbols, are they less than signs or less than or equal to signs, right? We can see we have a difference between the sign. So I would go into the story looking for that. I'm not going to do it. Remember, I'll post the full video explanations for these videos in the description, but that's how I do it. I'm starting at the answers, and then I'm looking for these kinds of differences in the question. That is guess and check at heart, right? I'm not coming up with the answer myself. I'm using the answers that I'm given and comparing them to the story. Okay, let's see this one. I definitely see equations, so that's a good sign. I can usually work with those. Okay, I have to solve for k, and it's got no solutions. Okay. So this is a good example of a question where there isn't really a strategic way to approach it. You're just going to need to know some stuff. I do see that I have a quadratic, and when I talk about the number of solutions to a quadratic, I know that I'm going to need this item known as the discriminant, and that is b squared minus 4ac. So this happens sometimes. Not every question on the SAT is going to be strategic. Sometimes you're just going to know a fact and use that fact and do some tedious algebra. This would be one of those cases. It is good, though, to be able to quickly look at a question and recognize which fact you need. So identifying or kind of like sorting equations, are they lines? Are they parabolas? Are they exponentials? Are they something else? That's a very important skill. And specifically a phrase like no solutions jumps out of a question for me. That is something that is absolutely going to affect how I answer it. So this one would just require some tedious algebra. Question 4. Perfect. Without even reading anything, I know exactly what I need to write on my page. Part over whole. Basically, that is an overall formula that we use when we have circle sectors, and that's what this is. It is a sector of a circle. Now, I don't care. I don't even know yet. I haven't read the question. I don't know if they want the area of that sector, the area of the shaded region. I don't know if it looks like they want the angle maybe. I don't know if they're giving me the area. I don't know if they're giving me the circumference or the radius or whatever. I do know that no matter what they give me, part over whole is going to be my way to solve. This is another strategy, and that maybe not one of the 3 big ones, but I kind of call it get back to basics. For a lot of SAT questions, we want to be able to kind of look at it, recognize what the topic is, and then write down the most essential piece of information, right? So part over whole is going to help me create fractions that represent the piece of the circle, the part of the circle that is highlighted here. So I'm going to be able to do that, and like I said, watch the full video explanation for that, but I already know my first step before I even read the question, just based on the picture and the frequency with which the SAT tests circle sectors. This is how they do it. Moving on. Okay, perfect. Right away, I know that this is going to be a great candidate for Arithmetize, the one where I pick random values for my variables. I know that because, first of all, I look at it and I see 1, 2, 3 variables. How often in school do you have equations with 3 letters? Not very often, okay? So you should already sense that this is going to be annoying and weird. And so we're trying to prevent ourselves from getting stuck somewhere along the way doing algebra. We want to use Arithmetize from the start and try to make the algebra easier. In this case, it seems like a, x, and y don't really matter. What I'd probably do here is pick values for x and y and solve for a. So I would probably pick something for x like 4, and maybe for y something like 2 or 0. And I'm doing that because I'm looking at the question and I'm seeing that, I'm looking up here, and I'm seeing that I'm going to have to divide some numbers by 2. So I don't want to pick 1 for x or y because that would create a fraction, and I would prefer to pick numbers that actually get rid of the fraction. So I'd pick numbers that are divisible by 2. I also wouldn't pick a value for a, and that's because of this equals sign here. A is not kind of floating around the question in the same way that x and y are. A is what's known as a dependent variable. Basically, I'm going to solve for a based on the numbers that I pick for x and y. So a will kind of end up being a number, about a semi-random number. But it's not completely random that I can just make up whatever I want. It's based on the equation, which is basically a rule that once I pick for x and y, I'm going to be able to find an a that specifically satisfies that equation. So there's a little algebra. But notice if I plug in for x and y, my equation changes. No longer is it a over 4 equals this messy thing. It's a over 4 equals, we'll say 4 and 2 here, 4 over 2 minus 2 over 2, right? So notice, now it's the basic algebra that you're used to. There's just one variable. Get a by itself and you've got its value. That has dramatically decreased the complexity of this question. And of course, if I have x and y, they're going to be the same x's and y's that I plug in on this other piece. And once I solve for a, it's going to be what gets plugged into the answer choices. This is a classic Arithmetize. You hopefully recognize that as soon as you see it. There's way too much algebra for this to be an algebra question. Next one here, same thing. I look at this and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is way too crazy algebra. So I would absolutely be arithmetizing here as well. It says x has to be greater than 0, so unfortunately I can't pick 0, but I might just pick something really simple like x is equal to 1, plug that in to here, then see what I get, and then see if these answer choices give me the same thing when I plug x equals 1 in here. This is an obvious arithmetize. If your reaction to this is anything other than arithmetize, your brain is broken. You are not doing the SAT correctly. You've got to pick some numbers here. For this one, okay, what is the least possible integer value for k? This is a great example of a guess and check question. I can probably create some equation pretty easily, but my first reaction is that I'm going to have some inequalities or something, and that can get messy. Sometimes you put the inequality together incorrectly. So it's really easy for me to guess and check. Just test these answers out as values for k, and specifically I would start with 4. Right? Because if they want the least possible value, I should start with the least value that's offered to me and test it out. So I'll just try it out. Let's just see. When 28 is decreased by 2 times k, so if this is k, then 2 times k is 8, the result is less than 16. Okay, so 28 minus 8 is 20. That is not less than 16, so I would know that A is wrong. And I would just continue from there doing the same thing. But that to me was so easy to think about, right? 28 minus 8, anybody can do that. So hopefully you would do the same thing here and guess and checks instead of creating an equation. Let's see, in the equation above, k is a constant. Okay, if the equation has exactly one solution, okay. Which of the following cannot be the value of k? This is another example where there isn't really a strategy. This is much more of a just know a fact. But notice that what I'm highlighting here came up on that earlier question where we talked about the discriminant. The number of solutions is a very common fact for the SAT to test. So we have to memorize what that means in different circumstances. In this case, I see that we have 2 lines, right? These match with y equals mx plus b. And this is actually a really quick question if you know the fact. One solution would be any line. Any 2 lines that cross are basically going to have one solution with a few exceptions. So when would there be a different number? When the lines are parallel, which means that they have the same slope. So we're looking at the m portion, and here my m is 4/5. So here, 4/5 would probably be the answer here as well. So I'm assuming that's the answer. Check my video if you're not sure, but that one would be very quick. Okay, which of the following is the value of y that satisfies the system of equations above? Well, this is a great example of my plug points into equations strategy. I could absolutely solve this with algebra. It's a system of equations. I know different ways of doing that. I'm pretty comfortable with algebra. But if you're not, you've got to recognize that we can very quickly guess and check or plug points into equations. They're kind of the same thing here. We have 2 equations, and we have half of a point. These are the y equals pieces, right? And with guess and check, whatever, you got to know what the answer choices represent. So I could take all of these, plug them in for the y, and then solve for the x, and I would have to test whatever point I come up with in both equations. It might be a little bit more tedious for some people than doing it with the algebra, but I do think it's less prone to a mistake. So, right, if I just chose something lazy, right, I would probably choose choice C first. I would put that in for y in the top equation, so 1 is equal to x minus 2. Add 2 to both sides. That would mean that 3 is equal to x. And then I would test that in this other point. So 3 times 3, or in this other equation, minus 1 is equal to 0, and that's just not true. 3 times 3 is 9, minus 1 is 8, not 0. So that would get rid of this choice. And when I do guess and check, I very often do it in a way that is laziest for me, right? So 1 is a very easy number for me to test, which is why I chose it first. Then I would probably go to choice D. Hopefully that works. If not, I would go to B and then A, right? I would get kind of increased complexity, but hopefully, you know, the lazier answer works and you don't have to check them all. So this is definitely something that you should be getting right no matter what. If you're confident with your algebra, do the algebra, get it right. But if you can't get it right, you've got to know to use a strategy instead. There's no excuse. This is something you cannot get wrong. Okay, last question here. What is the deal here? Well, this is also plug points into equations, but in a way, it's kind of just making sure you know what they're telling you and how this is a point. This is a y coordinate, and we can kind of see in the way that they gave this equation that that y coordinate is going to go in here for f of x, right? So function notation is another way of expressing points, so we have to be comfortable with that. And so all you're doing is putting that 2 right in here. I'm going to write right over it. And then you're going to solve with algebra for x. So it's very still algebraic, but on the whole, you're still going to be able to kind of think of it as plugging points into equations, which is why that is my favorite strategy. Because if you see that you have an equation, you got to ask, are there any points I can plug in? Very often the answer is yes. You either make them up yourself, that's what arithmetize is, or you use a point that they're giving you in the answers or in the question. So equations very often end up with you plugging a number in. This is no exception. Even though it is a little bit mathematical seeming, it's very simple strategically. And I think that that's the main point I want you to take away from this grouping here is a lot of this stuff looks confusing if you're not comfortable with math. But what the strategies let us do is make sense of it really quickly. And that feeling of confusion can be really helpful. If you look at something like this one and have a feeling of like, oh my gosh, this is nuts, that's good. That's your brain telling you, maybe try making the algebra disappear, maybe try arithmetizing. And you gotta try them. They might fail sometimes. But if the strategies work even 80% of the time that you try them, that's more questions that you're getting right, more points that you're earning, and you can deal with the other 20%, or you can just guess randomly. Use the strategies, improve your score. It's really that simple. Well, I hope this was helpful and it gave you some insight on how I think about the test and when you can use the strategies. The best way to get better at using the SAT math strategies is to take SAT math practice sections and do more practice questions. And the best way to do that is to subscribe to the Settele Tutoring channel and visit my website. I post questions of the day, I make longer lessons, and I have video explanations of every question from the official SAT practice test. So you will always know when a strategy is the right move because I will explain it and do it. So please subscribe. And if you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them. If you like the video, like the video. If I get enough likes, I will make more. If I know that these are helping, I know to make more stuff like this. So please, your feedback is really helpful. Thanks for watching.